Good morning. Hello, everybody. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to welcome you here today at the European Defence Fund Luxembourg Information Day. My name is Alexander Link. I work as a senior advisor at Lux Innovation, and I have recently taken over the task as R&D defense advisor within Lux Innovation. I will have the pleasure of guiding you through today's agenda, and this for the next 2 hours. So I see we already are more than 50 participants, and I'm of course looking forward because we have more than 100 participants registered. So I just would like maybe to start with some practical information beforehand. On the right side of your screen, you should all have access to the chat and to the polls. So you are welcome, and you will all have time throughout the whole webinar to provide your answers to the poll. Just to have a quick look at the questions that you can respond to. So those are you an SME, a large company or research institute? Have you ever worked in a collaborative project? Have you ever worked in an EU collaborative project? Do you have previous experience in the defense sector? And finally, are you interested in participating in an EDF project proposal? This is for the polls. Another point also on the chat, so please use it for any questions that might come to your mind. We have foreseen after each presentation several minutes for the Q&A, and we are of course there to take all your questions. Now, I am very pleased to have today a variety of speakers linked to this European Defence Fund. So Michel Garry, Legal and Policy Officer at the European Commission, will introduce the European Defence Fund and its functioning. Welcome, Michel. Azilis Guérin from the Luxembourg Directorate of Defence, who is also the EDF Luxembourg delegate, will provide us an overview of Luxembourg's defence priorities in terms of technology and capabilities. Welcome, Azilis. Then we will have an intervention by Michel Garry, CEO of DMG Consult, who collaborates with Lux Innovation on its defense mission to support companies and research institutes to get access to the European Defence Fund. He will explain today what are the rules of the game from an industry perspective and which key points you need to take into consideration when setting up an EDF proposal. Welcome, Michel. At last, we will also have a panel discussion with testimonials from the EDF precursor program, EDIDP. And I am very pleased to have among us Mr. Gerald Schlitter, Director of Government Solutions at LuxGovSat, Mr. Peter Raun, Chair and Executive Director at Clear Space, Mr. Holger Voss, Professor and Head of the Automation Department at the Interdisciplinary Center for Security, Reliability and Trust from the University of Luxembourg, as well as Mrs. Axel Gigou from the French company Vidicom Tech. So welcome to you all. Now, before giving the word to Mr. Komnik, I would like to explain briefly Lux Innovation's role in the frame of defense R&D activities in Luxembourg. Most of you know Lux Innovation as key and trusted partner for any organization conducting public and private research, development, and innovation, be it a startup, SMEs, large multinational groups, as well as research institutes. Research, development, and innovation, on the other side, are also the very core of security and defense, which relies on technologies of absolute top class. It therefore came quite natural for our defense minister to consider Lux Innovation as the key organization to work with in Luxembourg in order to support an intensified involvement of Luxembourg industry and research organizations in defense. Through Luxembourg's cluster initiatives, which brings together key experts from industry, research, and the ministries across the main sectors of the economy, Lux Innovation has already been able to foster the development of very promising economic sectors in Luxembourg: Industry 4.0, composite materials, cybersecurity, space, clean technologies, health technologies, automotive, and logistics. Now, in order to meet Europe's needs in terms of security and defense, further technological developments in these fields are essential. And it is therefore of no surprise that the European Commission has launched in February 2021 an action plan on synergies between civil defense and space industries, and now also the European Defence Fund shortly EDF. In this sense, I would like to point out that the European Defence Fund represents a major opportunity for organizations with and without previous experience in the military domain. We at Luxinnovation are there to help you in getting a clearer view of the R&D defense funding opportunities and to support you in getting access to these. So let us now start with the presentations. Our first speaker will be Michel Garry from the European Commission, DG Defense, Industry and Space. Michel, you can upload your presentation and the floor will be yours.
Thank you, Alexander. I'm going to upload my presentation. Share presentation, here it is. Okay, thank you again, and it's a pleasure to be invited to this National Info Day. It's the second time for me, this time the virtual format. Really appreciate your invitation, and also good morning to all participants. I will start my presentation with giving you a short background on the rationale behind the European Defence Fund and R&D cooperation, a very quick and brief outlook on the precursor programs, and then focus on the European Defence Fund. So what was the rationale for the European Defence Fund? Well, I mean, the cornerstone of the European Defence Fund is the industrial policy. This is the cornerstone, this is the legal basis of the European Defence Fund regulation that entered into force on 12th of May, just recently. The rationale, the industrial policy rationale stems from multiple facts. Probably a lot of you, also from the precursor programs, know the famous slides pointing to fragmentation of defense systems over Europe and comparing the overall set of defense systems to partners that also have, huge markets, but less fragmented markets. There are inefficiencies, there are economies of scale to gain, but the main purpose here is the competitiveness and innovation capacity of the European defense technological and industrial base. So this is our main objective. And from this objective, of course, there are several specific objectives. And these specific objectives take into account the specificity of the defense sector. There are two specific rationales for the defense fund. This has a strategic nature and a political nature. The strategic nature is, of course, a contribution to the strategic autonomy of the Union. So here we really want to foster the industrial capacity, but by cooperation among industry, but also by cooperation among the member states themselves. I will also deep dive into this further when I explain the procedures on how we achieve to work programs, to calls for proposals. And then there is also a political rationale, and this is to protect the essential security and defense interest of the Union and its member states. And this notably relies on the fact that all our endeavors, that the work programs themselves are influenced by the defense capability priorities commonly agreed by member states. There are also more, I would say, factors that we have to take into account, also based in our regulation, that are very closely linked to the defense interest of the Union and its member states when it comes, for example, to the eligibility of entities, which I will also come to later. But showing you the genesis of the program, and starting very early in 2016 with the European Defence Action Plan, first precursor program that paved the way to the European Defence Fund was, of course, the PRDR, the Preparatory Action on Defence Research, that started in 2017, is now, almost finished. Projects will last until 23. It has a budget of 90 million euro. Then, following the preparatory action, the European Defence Industrial Development Program that ran in 2019 and 2020. Of course, 2019 projects are ongoing, and we will also discuss, I think also in a later presentation by a colleague, that the EDIDP 2020 projects are also up to be funded very soon. Then the European Defence Fund, and you see on the slides, which is something that I may already point out here in this slide, is the regulatory nature of all these initiatives. The preparatory action had not been required to have an own legal act because it's a preparatory action, but also very limited in budget. But the EDIDP and the EDF, they have been based on a regulation. This means that the European Parliament and the Council negotiated, together with the Commission, of course, this regulation. And all the specificities that we will explain to you later in the slides and also by colleagues, these are to a large extent requirements set by the legislator when it comes, for example, to specific requirements on member state support of projects or the eligibility of entities. And then also, as you can see, the legislative process, it was something where we had a huge time pressure. The EDIDP was adopted in July 2018, and at the same time, the Commission already proposed the European Defence Fund regulation to be then discussed among Parliament and Council. And it's very, I mean, this is something, I mean, most recently, the entry into force of the European Defence Fund regulation on 12th of May, but of course, also a cornerstone was the political agreement among co-legislators in December last year in the last fifth and final trilogue. Now, very brief on PADR. So, as I already explained, this is a 3-year preparatory action with 90 million euro allocated to calls for proposals published between 2017 and 2019. It was indeed a test mechanism, and it already included some of the specificities that we also saw in EDIDP and we now see in the EDF. The EDIDP 2-year program, 2019-2020, with 500 million of budget. And here already we have in the regulation the clear objectives that are also stated for the EDF: competitiveness, efficiency, innovation capacity of the defense industry. Yes, the idea of leveraging cooperation through co-funding of capability development projects together with member states, with all these links that member states need to support projects to be funded under the EDIDP. And last but not least, the uptake of results of defense research. This is something where, and it's, you can see on the next slide, was one of the main novelties of the EDF, mainly the integration of research and development into one program. The EDF for this MFF, with a budget of close to 8 billion euro, the budgetary envelopes are increasing from year to year. So you can see it in the budgetary annex. There is a budgetary envelope of close to 1 billion for this year. Then it's increasing to up to, I think it was 1.4, 1.5 billion in 2027. So indeed, this is something that is growing, and we have mechanisms in place that allow us, together with member states, to make use of the budgets. We have annual work programs that define the budgetary envelope or prioritize the budgetary envelope, but I will also talk about this later. The objective is to boost competitiveness, efficiency, and innovation, as in EDIDP, and to support collaborative defense, R&D, and opening of supply chains. This is also one of the main objectives of the EDF. It is the opening of supply chains. It's not just the support of, I would say, flagship projects, which is something that is a demand by the member states and the let's say the capability priorities. Yes, but there's also, and this is one of the major advantages of the EDF, that with the co-funding of the EDF, the co-funding to large development projects, we can try, and we are opening up supply chains. We are increasing and fostering the agility of supply and value chains. We are increasing through bonuses, for example, the cross-border participation of SMEs and mid-caps, not only in supply and value chains, but also through dedicated calls for SMEs. So this is also one of the main objectives of the EDF. Of course, the EDF is aligned and in concert with all other defense initiatives on European level. As I said, the political priority, the political rationale, the defense and security interest of the Union and its member states are taken into account through the capability priorities commonly agreed by member states. And here you have the links to the EDA with the initiatives, the capability development plan. We have CART, you have the PESCO. There are recent initiatives like the strategic compass, of which you probably know, but all these inputs are coming to the EDF through the defense capability priorities commonly agreed by member states. Now to the principles. I've talked to about the integrated approach, the priorities commonly defined by member states. It is indeed something where we want to foster cooperation among research organizations, industry, but again also among member states. And this is something that where we indeed can draw first positive lessons learned from EDIDP, because it is not easy for member states to agree on common requirements for capability development projects, notably armament projects. This is something, multinational cooperation and armaments is something that is traditionally very cumbersome, and the EDIDP led to the fact that calls for proposals which are based on these functional requirements that member states need, all 27 member states in the program committee need to agree upon now. We saw that member states, under the time pressure set through I would not say through the program, because the time pressure is let's say a regulatory fact. We have 9 months time to grant from the financial regulation the entry into force of EDIDP and EDF. This is something that we cannot control. So the time pressure is there, but it is also a very positive lessons learned that member states in this short time frame really agreed among themselves on harmonized capability requirements, on this functional requirements that are necessary for the calls for proposals. The eligible entities are European actors mainly. I will come to it later. There are derogations, of course. The eligible actions, they cover all phases from research to prototypes and qualification of defense products and technologies. So we are not covering the production phase. We are not procuring a weapon system. We are not owning physical hardware, nor do we own IPR of projects. We are an inclusive program, as I already lined out. There is a strong objective on the inclusiveness of companies throughout the Union, of research actors throughout the Union, and focus on SMEs and mid-caps. We are a community program, and this you can see, I mean, already mentioned the legal base as our starting point, a regulation. But you can also see it later when I describe the procedures. We have a focus on disruptive technologies, dedicated support through 48% of the budget. And we have ethical aspects that we will have to take into account when assessing the proposals of industry. Now coming to the eligible entities. Here on the slide, you can see all kinds of participants to such projects. But let me clarify here or explain to you which of those can receive EU funding. So first of all, the first level is the consortium. Of course, we have certain, let's say, minimal requirements when it comes to the cooperativeness of industry and research actors. This is 3 undertakings or entities, can be research actors as well, from 3 member states or associated countries. Associated countries means here notably Norway. The Article 5 of the regulation opens up for the EFTA states that are member of the EEA, but de facto it is by now only Norway that showed interest to be part of the EDF. Those companies have to have their management structures established in the Union, and their infrastructure, facilities, assets, and resources shall be located in the Union. Of this, there are derogations possible. I will come to it on the next slide. So first is the consortium, and all consortium members, they will of course receive directly the budget of the EU project. The second, I would say, first tier entities are the linked third parties. These are parties with a legal or capital link with a beneficiary that can therefore not be in the consortium itself, but they can directly also claim budget, receive EU funding. They also have to comply with all the eligibility criteria that the beneficiaries, the recipients in the consortium, also have to comply with. Then we have another set of entities being at the first tier, I would say. Yes, these are the so-called associated partners. And we have the possibility to allow cooperation between the consortium with companies established in third countries, as long as they fulfill, of course, the security-based conditions. This is possible, but these associated partners will not receive EU funding. This means that in case we have a development project that is co-funded, or in the sense that the remaining costs of the action are covered by other means of financing, these associated partners can very well participate to a project, including by receiving funding, for example, through a member state's contribution, but they cannot receive funding through the EU budget. And then on the second tier, we have subcontractors and suppliers. Subcontractors, in the meaning of the EDF regulation, are those that are either directly linked or have a direct contract with one of the beneficiaries, so the next tier, but they can also be subcontractors that have a certain percentage allocated, work share allocated to them, or that have access to classified information. All those subcontractors have to also comply with the specific conditions in the EDF regulation. So there are some derogations applicable, and this is one of the had been and is today the most complex mechanism that and was also the most disputed mechanism among the Council and Parliament and the Commission on how to really phrase the potential involvement of non-EU entities into the EDIDP and then the EDF, and how to allow also non-EU controlled entities to participate. And the result of this, let's say, complex mechanism is that as a first important to highlight is that we consider those companies established in Europe that have a foreign ownership or control if they comply with the security-based and I highlight security-based conditions, we do not discriminate them towards European, I would say European companies. Yes. So if these non-EU controlled companies are eligible to receive a derogation, they receive normally like any other participant to a consortium the EU funds. They are really treated the same way. What they need to put in place to receive such a derogation is, of course, they have to show, to substantiate that there are no risk in the ability to perform the action. So there are no risk to information that they treat. So security of information, security of supply, and that the IPR that they generate remains in the EU, and all export is exported only with approval by their hosting member states. And one of the main also links to the member states now here is the so-called guarantee. So all this that has to be substantiated by industry has to be approved in form of a guarantee by the hosting member state. And so here we have a link between the industry, the entities, and the respective member states. It's also possible to cooperate with entities outside the Union. As I explained, these are the so-called associated partners. The derogation for this cooperation is also based on security merits. So mainly no contravention against the security and defense interest of the Union, and no potential negative effects on security of supply of the action. These are the main requirements. Now to the eligible actions. The EDF covers actions that are R&D activities leading to new and upgrade of existing defense products and technologies. The background and generated foreground IP shall not be subject to any control or restrictions by non-EU countries' entities. This is also one of the conditions that is very important to highlight here. It is not to be understood as private IPR restrictions that are applied in usual business practice. So if you are using, for example, a software of a non-EU company to write your papers or to use, I don't know, a CAD program, for example, and there are IPR restrictions on it, of course, this is not meant by our restrictions. What is meant are really restrictions that lead to limitation of the freedom to use the final results of the action. The cost of the action that are not covered by the Union support are to be covered by other means of financing. So here in the EDF, as you know, we have this research and this capability development window. And notably for the capability development window, we apply so-called co-funding rates. For the research part, we have 100% funding. But for the development part, we have co-funding rates. And the consortium has to provide evidence that the remaining costs of the projects are funded by a means. It can be own equity, this can be a loan, but this can also be the contribution of member states. And this is something that is also a lesson learned from EDIDP, and is also probably something that is inherent to the market. In most cases, it is the member states that co-fund these projects. So the next requirement from the design activities onwards is that all actions have to be based on harmonized defense capability requirements jointly agreed by at least 2 member states. This is something also where we need the support of the MODs. That's why it's important if you plan to join a consortia or to set up a consortia that at an early stage, as early as possible, I would say, do you approach your ministry, responsive ministry, for support when it comes to, for example, these, let's say, member states supporting documents. So, for example, the statement that the capability requirements are jointly agreed among the supporting nations, that for prototyping and beyond, common technical specifications are jointly agreed, and also for prototyping and beyond, the member states that support the project intend to procure the final product. Very quick on the funding rates, I already explained. Notably for development window, we have co-funding rates, prototypes up to 20%. There is a bonus system, and I explained this in the beginning, on incentives for cross-border participation of SMEs and mid-caps, a 10% PESCO bonus. This links again to other EU defense initiatives, and a cap of the bonus at 35%, meaning that if you develop a prototype, the activity prototype is limited to a maximum of 55%. All these, the costs that incur at your site are normally actual direct and indirect cost. That's the normal way of working in grants. The EDF regulation provides additional possibilities. The additional possibilities are the use of lump sums. This is something that is explicitly stated in the EDF regulation and is tested already by us in multiple projects. In PADR, there's a lump sum call, and in EDIDP, we are now close to finalizing the lump sum grant agreements with the Eurodrone and the ESSO consortium. So lump sum means that you will provide your cost estimation in detail ex ante. We will analyze this and freeze the cost table. We will then derive from the cost table milestones, lump sums, and then we will not anymore ex post audit the costs. Yes, it is really a merit and performance-based project management. This is something that's a real advantage, and we have it in the EDF regulation, clearly stated as in the article on financing. We will I guess, I'm quite sure we'll make use of it. The next is the indirect costs, and here you have 25% flat rate for indirect costs, but you also have as an alternative, and this is also stated in the regulation, the application of so-called actual indirect cost following national accounting practices. Let me very quickly go through the award criteria: excellence, innovation, competitiveness, but also the industry autonomy and the security and defense interest of the Union, and the focus on cross-border cooperation. I will not go into too much detail on the award criteria, but rather focus, and this is very interesting, on the implementation in practice, because here you can also see on the slide where exactly the assessment of these award criteria comes into play. Now, as I said, we are a community program, so we have to follow community rules in preparation and implementation of the EDF, meaning that the Commission is the one that proposes the implementing act to a body, and this is the so-called program committee, a program committee consisting of all member states and having the EAS and the EDA as observer. Voting rights is only for member states. The comitology regulation and also the EDF regulation has defined, let's say, a strict regime when it comes to the powers of member states, meaning that this body is not only to be consulted, it has a decisive function. The member states, by qualified majority, have to vote on the proposed draft implementing act, on the work program, for example, that defines the budget and the categories to be funded in the upcoming year. So this is something that really has a central role, the program committee of member states. So how does it work? the Commission prepares the draft implementing act. It defines this draft implementing act together with the member states. It takes into account the EU priorities, the priorities set by other defense initiatives. I will then submit this draft work program for a favorable opinion to the Program Committee of Member States. The Program Committee of Member States and the Commission also together define not only the categories of actions and the respective budget linked to the categories of actions, we also define the so-called functional requirements. And this is translated directly into the call text. So the requirements that you will see when the calls for proposals are published, these requirements are discussed and voted by the member states, by your member states in the program committee. So after the publication of the calls for proposals, you will have a certain timeline to respond, which is usually set to 6 to 9 months. It's really dependent on the time pressure we have. This year, we expect the timing to be set to end of December. So giving you around 6 to 7 months to submit your proposals. This is mainly due to the late entry into force of the EDF regulation. This is something that we couldn't, we couldn't speed up due to the next MFF discussions and all that happened in the last month. But we are quite confident that from next year onwards, we can speed up this process. I mean, as I explained, the prioritization setting with member states to be able to launch the calls earlier before summer. So you would have around 8 to 9 months time to respond. So,
dear Michel, maybe just rapidly, if we can finish the presentation in 1 minute, so we still have time for the questions afterwards.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, perfect. Yeah, I'm already almost finished. So after you submitted your proposal, it will be assessed by independent experts, and we will have a ranking of all the proposals according to the budget available, and the Program Committee of Member States will then a second time vote on the ranking list. After this, we will step up in the so-called grant agreement preparation phase, where we will negotiate with you or discuss with you the so-called grant agreement, and then we step up into the implementation and monitoring phase. So this is the implementation in practice, and with this, I try to put the next slide on the screen, just the state of play, and this I already highlighted. So we have a formal regulation in place. We're looking forward to adopt the first work program very soon, before the summer. So we were able to launch the call for proposals by, I would say, July, and you will be able to submit by December, and by 2022, we will have the first EDF grant agreements signed. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Michel, for this very complete and interesting presentation. So I would propose to go rapidly through a number of questions, which I just start in live answer. So the first one would be about the associate partners. Could you maybe just tell us more about the funding opportunities for associated partners?
Yes. Associated partners are those, I mean, we consider associated partners those that are established in a non-EU country. So meaning in practice, this is the cooperation partner to a European consortium coming, let's say, from United States, from Canada, or from another, let's say, NATO, for example, NATO member. This is the cooperation requirements are that associated partners do not contravene the security and defense interest of the Union. So indeed, an associated partner coming from specific nations, non-EU nations, is not very probable, but in the armament cooperation, we don't see that this would happen. The thing is with the associated partners that they cannot recoup their costs through the EU budget. This indeed means that they can perfectly participate in a project, that they can bring in their expertise, that they can be allocated work packages, yes, but they cannot recover or recoup their cost. This does not mean that it's not beneficial for associated partners to participate in a project if they bring in their own resources for the R&D phase. Huh? It's not procurement. So we are in the R&D phase. So they bring in their own resources to the project because they have a business case. If they participate to the project, they will have a market later on to sell their product. So this is one of the reasons. They might just bring in their own resources, or their share is covered by a contribution of the supporting member state, which is also possible.
Great, thanks. I would maybe just take another question before then going on to the next presentation. So here's another question of Madame Anastasopoulos. How is the intention to procure confirmed? What LOE is enough?
Well, I mean, the intention to procure, it was originally in the EDADP negotiations among Council and Parliament. There was a commitment to procure, which was a little bit, I would say, softened up to an intention to procure, because it's clear that the consolidated investment decision that member states take to procure a final product is very difficult to commit to in a stage where you don't even know how the prototype at the end will look. So not to know if the aircraft will really fly, and then you already commit a credible amount of the defense budget. And so we have an intention to procure, and the legal nature of this intention, I mean, the document as such, it is not. I would say we do not prescribe a certain form. What we need to see is the willingness of the member states to procure the product, would say, if it turns out that it's a very good product. So the intention has to be there. It has to be somewhere in it, for example, in an LOI.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Michel. I see there's a lot of other questions. So what I would propose, and not to get too late with the schedule, is to maybe answer them in the chat, or there's also the possibility to later contact us, and we will get back to you. So I would propose in the next step to go on with the presentation. So Azélis Guérin, of the Director of Defense, and Luxembourg EDF representative in Brussels. Azélis, the floor is yours. We cannot hear you yet. Yeah, now you are muted. Okay, now it will work. Or if it's not possible, then we might possibly first go on with the presentation of Michel. Now we hear you. Perfect, Azélis.
Yes, thank you. Sorry. It always works in the test session and the trial, and then it never works on when it has to. So I will upload the presentation. Choose this media. Okay, can you all see the slides?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, participants. So on behalf of the Defense Directorate, I'm very happy to address you all for this very first national event on defense R&D funding. My name is Azilis Guérin. I work for the Luxembourg Defense Directorate, and I'm the national EDF delegate based in Brussels, which is the one sitting in the program committee with the Commission, with Misha and the other member states, and discussing all these very difficult and complex rules. So first of all, I'd like to thank Lux Innovation, of course, for organizing this Info Day. And we really hope that this will kick off a strong participation of Luxembourgish actors in EU defense activities over the next years. And thank you also to Misha Komnik for his extensive and precise presentation on the EDF mechanisms and rules. So within the next few minutes, I'll be drawing an overview on the defense priorities in terms of R&D and how the Defense Directorate could support you in your participation to the EDF. Also, feel free to raise any questions in the chat box. I'll be happy to try and clarify. So I'll start by echoing what Alex said in the very beginning, is that the EDF is a major opportunity not only for industry and RTOs, but also for member states themselves, since it should help them optimize national defense investments and also help them deepen cooperation among them, so that they can invest together in technologies and capabilities that they need, as Misha pointed out already as well. Ultimately, the fund should also help the EU industry to become more competitive and the EU to be more resilient in terms of capability. So there are two things that you will need to take care of when submitting your EDF project proposals. First, you must ensure that they have a true defense application. There will be very few space for dual-use projects and absolutely none for projects that have a primarily civilian focus. And we have witnessed this in the EDIDP with a lot of very interesting and innovative projects, but that just didn't make it to funding just because there was lacking this defense DNA, if I can say so. The second point would be that your projects will have to fit in national and EU defense priorities, and the identification of projects and topics, and also your proposals of projects after that will have to be kind of balanced between what member states need through this capability-driven approach, as Misha said, when we decide and elaborate the work programs, and also what the industry can offer, so something more disruptive and technology driven. The fund will have to serve and fill technological and capability gaps of the EU. So that is a kind of a key word, which is very often said. But what you need to know is that we're not heading blind into the dark. We exactly know what the EU needs in terms of capability. We know what the member states need as well. And this was, among others, summarized in a public document called the Capability Development Plan, the CDP, which was published back in 2018. And this document provides a broad picture of European military capabilities over time, and which can also be used to identify avenues of cooperation. And the EDF will also build on the CDP to prepare the annual calls for proposal. So you see in the slide is that when you start on the left side, the initial input to the EDF are the EU priorities with the CDP. Can also be other documents. There are a lot of statements about this topic, and also national priorities. So they most of the time come from the ministries of defense. But they also can be found in broader national policies and strategies or general capability needs from armed forces. So all this little package together with the EU capabilities is what's called the capability-driven approach, and which will enable the Commission and the member states to elaborate the so-called EDF work programs and the calls for proposal. And based on these work programs and calls for proposals, you as the industry and RTOs will be able to add your innovative and disruptive skills to propose those projects that will match our ambitions, actually. So when we speak about priorities of defense, in the case of Luxembourg, they have much evolved over the last years. We've seen space and cyber become much more important. We've seen a lot of focus on digitization, on new technologies. And what's important here is that out of the 16 categories or topics, or let's say, thematic categories that will be addressed by the EDF over the next 7 years, 7 actually fit or are linked to areas in which Luxembourg's defense is already active or might become even more active over the next years. So this is what you can see on this slide. On the left side, you can see the list of categories that are going to be addressed by the EDF every year in the work program. So for each category that you see, you will have either calls for proposal for defense, for research projects, or development projects, or both, or none. That will depend on the priorities set every year. On the right side, you see those categories that match a national area of priority and on which more focus will be given by Luxembourg Defense in the next years. So we have the cyber defense domain, of course, we have space, in particular satellite communications and Earth observation and anything that is going to that is going to be linked to these topics, but not limited to. Digital transformation, materials and components, energy resilience, and environmental transition. So green defense is becoming an area of both major, let's say, concern, but also opportunities in the EU, and also for Luxembourg Defense, which has already pretty much committed to do more in this field. And so in general, we could only encourage Luxembourgish actors, industry and researchers to identify projects in this field, since green defense is really becoming a major thing at EU level, and in the military domain also, as we can see through activities that are running through the European Defence Agency, for instance, and to which you can participate as well. Military mobility and force protection and disruptive technologies. There's another category of, I'd say, utmost importance for most of you as Luxembourgish actors, which is the SME category. Misha already touched on before. In fact, you need to see the EDF having an objective to support SMEs' participation and also inclusion in the EU defense supply chains. That's one thing that was pointed out since the beginning. And so that's why the annual EDF work programs will also offer SMEs a ground to compete in parallel to all these thematic categories in so said open calls for SMEs. So of course, as you can imagine, a competition in these calls will be intense. We've witnessed that also in EDIDP, and I think Michel is going to touch on this later on, so I'll stop here. But they're very important and also very interesting. Oops, what is happening with my slides? Very interesting for Luxembourgish actors. Also, they have a particular funding scheme, those SME open calls, since they have a funding ceiling of 2.5 million euro per project. So you'll never get more than this when submitting in this category, but which is already pretty good. And you'll be able to look all that up once the program, the work programs and the calls for proposal will be published. So let's get to the financial support part, which is probably the most important or most interesting for you. So just as a reminder, the EDF is two-folded. There's a research dimension and a development dimension. Both can receive funding from the EDF, but under slightly different rules when it comes to national governmental involvement. The If your research project is selected for funding, then it will be funded by the EDF budget exclusively and covering up to 100% of your project costs. No funding from member states is required for a research project. So it will work out just as in Horizon 2020. For those of you who know, it's up to you to identify the topics, to organize yourselves, to candidate, and to receive the requested funding. As for the development projects, they're linked to a rather innovative principle of EU funding, which is the co-funding between the EU budgets, which is the EDF, and national budgets, mostly from MODs, and the consortium budgets. So as So as Misha explained already, the EDF will only fund part of your development project costs, ranging from 20 to 80%. That will depend on what kind of project it is. And the remaining parts will obviously have to be provided by either the consortium or the member states or both. The amount of this remaining parts will depend, of course, on aspects such as the overall cost of your project, the nature of your project, whether it's prototyping, certification, design, which will determine to how much funding your project is entitled to by the EDF. It will depend on whether you can apply for bonuses and, of course, how many member states join the project in co-funding. We will get back to this in a minute. And also, just as a very, very, very simplified example, if your project can be funded after you've calculated everything, that's consortium internal kitchen. If you're funded of up to 50%, let's say worst case, so it can even be more, by the EDF, and you're eligible to a 20% bonus, then obviously the 30% remaining will have to be brought either by you or the member states. Why is this so important? The first goal of the EDF, as said in the beginning, is to fund capabilities that are needed by the European Union and the member states. So to ensure that the funds from the EU budget and also the national budgets are spent accordingly for projects that will be of interest to member states, consortia will need to prove that their development projects fill two things. First, that they contribute to the further integration of the European defense industry. That means that your consortia will need to be as multinational as possible to increase its chances in the evaluation process. It's all about cross-border participation. The second thing would be that your project will have to prove that the member states plan to jointly use or own the final product or technology, which means that as more member states your project or member states support your project, then the better it is, because the more it fits into the eligibility criteria of the EDF. Let's move on. So if you're planning to participate in a development project as a lead industry or not, then you may want to inform and involve the Defense Directorate in order to investigate potential funding support. And you'll also need to look out for national support from member states, again, as many as possible, so to make your project far-reaching. Also, I would like to highlight a final very, very important aspect here. Luxembourg has national defense priorities and specific topics that it could support more than other, just like other member states as well. And therefore, Luxembourg cannot financially support all the projects you're involved in and you're proposing to us. What's important here is that, however, the fact that the Defense Directorate might not fund your project does not mean that your project is not worth it. It doesn't mean that it will not make it to EDF funding. Let's say a non-interest statement from us should not hamper your participation in this specific project or even keep you from submitting other projects in other categories. This is a very important aspect, because if you're interested in a topic and you want to work on it, or you're being invited to join a project, project, which Luxembourg's defense cannot co-fund for any reason. It can be budgetary, it can be human resources that, most of you know, we're a very small team. So also because maybe it doesn't fit into national activities, if you suggest to build a naval defense topic or a new submarine for the EU, then obviously Luxembourg will maybe not be that interested in supporting that. But anyways, you can still join the project and submit a project proposal to the Commission. To conclude my intervention, I'd like to say that we're really glad, Defence Directorate, to have Lux Innovation supporting you now throughout the EDF, and also general EU defence activities. They will support you in regarding submission procedures and reaching out to industry networks, anything you need, so that you can put a feet in this sector. And also, I may already thank Alexander a lot for his energy and commitment in this matter. So, having said this, I wish you all good luck for submitting innovative and interesting project proposals to the EDF 21 calls. And also feel free to reach out should you need any clarity or clarification on national support issues. Keep in mind that we have now 7 years of EDF in front of us, and there will be plenty of occasions for Luxembourg's industry and researchers to show what it can do. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Azelis, for this very, very precise presentation. I think it's very interesting to see that Luxembourg has a clear view on the priorities, just to mention all the areas that you want to be active more in: cyber defense, space, digital transformation, materials and components, energy resilience, green defense, military mobility, anti-disruptive technologies, and of course not to forget that the participation of SMEs is really a key, and their inclusion into the EU defense supply chain. So maybe just some questions from the chat. I saw that there was one question on the funding on the EDF that you addressed rapidly. I think this should be answered already. Maybe then just another question. So we have here, in fact, the question of Konstantinos Liolis about Lux defense priorities. Space is mentioned. Does this refer to satellite communications and or satellite Earth observation and or to satellite navigation?
So actually, space, as you may know, is a general priority area for Luxembourg. We're also trying now to do more in defense related to in space related to the defense sector. And again, all this will depend on the annual work program. So every year, the member states and the Commission will sit together and elaborate the work program for the next year. And this work program will include priorities that may already have been included in the work program before, or maybe in the work program after, or not at all. So this is something we can only say at this stage that we are having a focus on defense space projects. We cannot tell exactly which will be the specific topic on which we would like to work or which we would be able to support. That will have to be looked every year according to the work programs and the calls. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, great. And maybe just another question was from Ricardo Patricio. Is the draft work program already available?
No, it's not. It's under Michel's control. I think it should be published either the last week of June or the first week of July, together with the calls for proposal. And I think Lux Innovation will, in any case, be there to inform today's participants about the publication of this document. I assume so.
Great, thank you very much, then, Azelis. I think this was clear. Let's then move on to our next speaker, Michel Garry from DMG Consult, whom Lux Innovation collaborates with, will provide you with key insights from an industry perspective. Michel, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name is Michel Garry. I work for 30 years in the French MOD. and I was recruited by the European Defence Agency at the very beginning, and I exercising my consulting activities in 13 years, and I had opportunity last year to support two SME consortia for the EDIDP 2020. So, of course, in my presentation, I will repeat some points that were already said by Misha and Azilis, but I mean, it's belong to the pedagogy to repeat things. First, a few words about the context. It started with the European Defence Action Plan, actually launched in November 2016 by President Jean-Claude Juncker, and it was aiming at that time already to set up a European Defence Fund with two windows. We already addressed these two windows, the research windows and a capability window. And to launch the research window, it was two initiatives were implemented by the European Defence Agency. The pilot project, it was a preliminary test run, and the preparatory action on defense research, PADR, of which Misha already spoke. For the pilot project, there was a small amount of budget available, and 3 projects were funded. The TRL, the technology readiness level, was at that time up to 8, and 21 submissions were arrived to the European Defence Agency from 83 participants from 20 countries. So, and at that time, 3 consortium were wanting this first run or preliminary run: UK, University, Portugal, and Netherlands Aerospace Center. Then PADR, as already stated, took place, and in 2019 appeared for the first time the concept of open call managed by the Commission. Open call, that means without any technical specification or functional specification. So it was a call for project with an amount of 4.3 million euro. 3 projects were funded with a TRL up to 3. It was at that time specified, the TRL was specified. And between 17 and 19, 10 calls were published. 27 proposals were submitted by consortia, and at the end of the day, we had a success rate of 23% in terms of enterprises which were funded, and about 15% in terms of selected projects. It could give you an idea of the possible success rate of the next initiative. So the PADR were intended to prepare the window research, which will be funded over the 7 years coming, for about 2.7 billion euro. It's already defined in the regulation. So now for the capability window. As already stated by Misha, the EDIDP was intended to pave the way of the capability window with a co-funding possibility of 5.3 billion euro. And the IDIDP was aiming at co-funding defense project up to 500 million. So the result of the 19 call are available and published by the Commission, and the result of the last year, that means the 2020 calls, were proposed to the member states the day before yesterday, and that the member states have to decide if the result should be published and should be published and to inform the coordinator of the consortium. what is the lessons learned from the EDIDP 19? 9 calls were released, 40 proposals were received from participants from 26 member states, of which 15 proposals from SMEs in the framework of the open call dedicated to SMEs. It was noted a strong involvement of SMEs, which were representing 37% of the entity applying to the 9 call. That means 83 SMEs against 140 other profiles, and 40% of all proposals were received in answer to the SME open call. So 16 projects are actually co-funded, of which 3 SME projects receiving about 11 million euro of grant. And in addition, 9 projects were developed in the context of the PESCO, because as already said, there is a synergy between this intergovernmental approach, PESCO, and the FED, which is funded by the Union. A total of 223 entities from 24 member states have received a grant, and the total allocated by the Commission amounts to 200.5 million for a total cost of the project of 279 million. That gives you an idea of the co-financing rate of the Commission and the co-financing rate of the member states or other sources. And we have also to notice that for this year 19, Spain and Greece are managing half of the project in 19. So next slide. Now, what do you need to know and to do before engaging in the EDF proposal submission? There are a lot of reference documents that you have to carefully read. First, the regulation. The regulation which is published, which is a basis, a legal basis. You have to read it. It's not a long document, 28 pages. Then you will have to read carefully the work program that will be issued. We already stated that it will be probably end of June, early July. Then the call for proposal documentation that will be also published at the end of probably early July, and particularly the EDF 2021 call for proposal and conditions for the call, in order to choose the relevant call and topics you want to address, to understand the admissibility condition. What does it mean? That means the language in which you have to submit your proposal, the submission form duly completed, character and pages number limitation, the deadline that you have to respect. And then you have also, by reading this call for proposal and condition, to understand the eligibility criteria. We already spoke about that. There are 2 kinds of eligibility for the proposed action: relevant activity for research action and for development action, conviction regarding the consortium, official support when needed, ethic, and the second aspect of eligibility regards the entity involved in the action, definition of applicant, and particularly the SME status. It's not so easy. It could be that in some context, a company, an enterprise could be recognized as SME in, for example, Horizon 2020, and perhaps not in the new context of FED. It is not so easy. We had a lot of questions for some company which have a proposal. We have submit a proposal in 2020. So it's not so easy. You have to comply with the Commission recommendation of May 2023. 2003. Next slide. So regarding the award, the eligibility criteria, I will concentrate a little bit of control. What does it mean, control? It is defined in the regulation, the ability to exercise decisive influence. That means appointment and removal of senior management, for example, or on the budget, on investment business plan, on market-specified decision. And that's why before deciding to go ahead in the EDF adventure, you have right now to verify some points. The ownership structure and the specific right. You have to analyze your corporate governance. You have to analyze the commercial links conferring a control, a possible control, financial links, other source of control. And if necessary, if you deem that you could be controlled by a third country or a third country entity, you have to start right now to draft appropriate guarantee that you will have to let approve by the Directorate of Defense, as already said. All this stuff is defined in the Article 9(4) of the regulation. Now, what document you will have to attach to your proposal in order to comply with the requirement of the calls? So you have to provide evidence. It could be by filling the annexes of the call. You will probably have the same annexes that for the EDIDP, and also supporting documents. Regarding the public and private undertaking established in the Union, and regarding also the presence of the executive management or your enterprise in the Union, you could have to provide extract of trade of association register. For the economic activity, you have to provide the description of goods and services offered in the market. So extract of trade, it is written, I won't read exactly what is written on the slide, but you have through the description an example of the document, of the supporting document you will have to provide in order to have a eligible offer. Executive management structure established in the Union, extract of the official journal, and other any official legal document. Regarding the location of the infrastructure, you will have probably the same annex that was proposed for the EDIDP, the Annex 7, which will allow to give all the requested information, and you have to follow carefully all the instruction of the guide of applicant, the guide for applicant. The next slide. So regarding the control, that's a very tricky point. You will have to demonstrate that you are not subject to control by a third country or a third country entity. And for that, you have to complete the related annex. It was the Annex 6 during the EIDP test run. You have to provide a report of minutes of the last 3 shareholder meetings. You have to provide a graph describing the chain of control. I give you an example just after. And the agreement or similar arrangement in order to prove that you are not controlled. And if you deem that you are controlled, so again, go ahead in the drafting the guarantee that will be accepted by your defense directorate. Okay, an example of a graph that you will have to annex to your offer. So on this example, starting from the left side, you see that the enterprise Epsilon, so the blue one are let's say, a European company, and the red one are out of not European European member states company. So starting from the left, the enterprise Epsilon is owned by ultimate owner A2 with 70 multiplied by 20%. That means 14% of the share. Then the ultimate owner B11. I don't know. You see my yes. B11 has 60 multiplied by 40%. That means 24% of the shares. The B22 ultimate owner has 20% multiplied by 40%, and in a second time by 40%. That means 3.2 of the share, and the ultimate owner C21 has 41% multiplied by 20. That means 9.8%. And you can see that at the end of the day, the company Epsilon Capital is controlled by third country entity with a total of 51%. So it is an exercise that you will have to do before starting to or deciding to go ahead with your proposal. So I will come back to the different activity. You have to be familiar with the vocabulary now. Activity are entering in the composition of an action, a development action or a research action. So the 9 activities that will be eligible are written on the screen. So if we summarize each activity, the A1 is generating knowledge, the B1 is integrating knowledge, C, study, D, design, system prototyping, testing, qualification, certification. And a combination of these different activity will form a research action or a development action. For research action, it will be permitted to have activity A, B, C, and D. And you remember that according to the research action, you will have a mechanism of funding which will be different from the mechanism of funding of the development action. And for the development action, it could be composed from B, C, D, E, E, until I activity. I will come back to the possible baseline funding rate for each activity of an action, because it is not written in the regulation, but it will be defined in the work program and in the call documentation. The baseline funding rate will be less than 100%, except for the first activity, which will be specifically reserved to research action. But probably you will have some question of this issue, and I will reply afterward.
Michel, maybe just to have a look at the agenda, if you can finish in 5 minutes, so
Yeah.
then we will still have possibility for questions.
Okay, so I won't comment on this slide because Michel already defined or explained this funding rate or the co-funding rate for the next call. We have to mention that there will be a specific bonus for the SME open call. Just for your information, that is the table defining the baseline funding rate for the EDIDP. So I won't comment on that, but you'll see on the screen that it is an adaptation of the regulation, which will allow to have bonus and not to exceed 100% of funding for each activity. Regarding the development action, you have to note that you should demonstrate that an action, the cost of an action, are totally covered. It will be demonstrated through an attestation, through the LOI provided by the member state, stating that they will co-fund. And the second specificity is that for design activity, you will have to provide, at least from 2 member states, initial common requirement to be harmonized and approved and signed by the member state. And generally, the initial common requirement are drafted by the industry, by the member of the consortium, to be submitted to the member states. And regarding prototyping, testing, qualification, certification activity, you will have to provide a LOI signed by one member state. You have to be conscious that the LOI is not a legal commitment. It is just an intention. Now, some advice in order to set up your proposal. Once assessing your eligibility, you have to identify the relevant call and topic of your for your enterprise. The thematic call are associated with functional, or will be associated with functional specification. And for the SME, it will be an open call. And you have to define if you want to enter in a research or a development action. You have to define as soon as possible your strategy regarding the consortium building to join existing consortium for the big call, thematic call, or to join a SME consortium for the SME open call. Or you can also decide to build by yourself and to coordinate a consortium, probably SME consortium. In case you choose a development action, you need to inform, as Elise said, as soon as possible your national authority to get the official support. And the official support, once again, is concretized by a letter of intent and initial common requirement to propose by member states to other PMS, if you are coordinator, or to be accepted by your member state, which is coming from another PMS of which enterprise is coordinator. You have to check your ability against the criteria, it's clear. And if you are consortium coordinator, you have to estimate rapidly the budget of your project and the breakdown among the members of the consortium in accordance with the provision of the work program. So the following advice: read carefully the guide for applicant. It is the key of success, and all the submission form indication. Don't see the administrative part of a secondary part. It is very important. You have to consider carefully this administrative part, to tackle ASAP the annexes and the supporting document. It is time consuming. You have to start very early to gather all the supporting document to be annexes to be attached to your offer. Regarding the description, that means the technical description of the action, you have strictly to stick on the award criteria and to really to write the technical part accordingly to the award criteria. It will facilitate the job of evaluator, and it will be easier for you. It will be a key factor of success to facilitate the job of the evaluator. And you have to demonstrate that your project is really in relation with the EU capability priority. And last but not the least, for the SME, you have the option to increase your chance of success to be supported by a relevant consulting company. So I'm finished with my presentation. Sorry if it was not in the proper English language.
Thank you, Michel. I think it was very clear still. Thank you very much. I see now we have 30 minutes left for this info day. So I would propose also for any questions, you can address them, of course, in the chat. Also, as a recall, please use the polls. I see they have not been used so much far. So it would be great if you could take the time also to answer those 5 questions. And we would then like to go on to our panel. So I see all the panelists are already switched on. So I would just like to present them rapidly. So we have GovSat, for those who might not yet know them, which is a public-private joint venture between the Luxembourg government and SES, the world-leading satellite operator. Their mission is to provide secure, reliable, and accessible satellite communication services for government. Then we have the Center for Security, Reliability, and Trust, shortly SNT. This is one of the 3 interdisciplinary centers of the University of Luxembourg. The SNT's strategic research priorities are cybersecurity, Internet of Things, space systems, secure and compliant data management, autonomous vehicles, and fintech. We also have ClearSpace, which is an Earth observation technology and data as a service company. ClearSpace delivers global maritime radio signal activity-based intelligence and geolocation as a service. And finally, there's also Vidicom Tech, which is a small company from France, specialized in autonomous systems engineering and new mobility business. It is a subsidiary of the research institute Vidicom, which is conducting public-private research and training dedicated to sustainable mobility. Now, all of you have already been able to experience the submission of a proposal within the European Defence Fund precursor program EDIDP. For companies with no previous experience in this program, getting inside is the right network. This is the key. So I therefore would like to ask to all of you this first question. How did you get in contact with the European defense market, and what made you decide to go for the EDIDP calls? Maybe Gerald, if you could start.
Yes, so good morning to all. Gerald Schlüter here from GovSat speaking. So yeah, so by the introduction given you by Alexander, so we are a satellite operator in Luxembourg working with the governmental frequencies. So by nature, we are having quite a customer base in the defense sector. And we are then, of course, looking always how we can further differentiate going forward. What are the new technologies? What are the innovations which might come up during the foreseeable future to come into the market? And that's the reason why we are actually looking certainly always to the left and to the right, and especially here in the context of these opportunities as provided by EDIDP, where we are already active for a while now within a major program, but also then going forward in the future into the EDF sector. So these domains relating to space, as alluded to before, are certainly providing quite some potential, and we are seeing quite some potential opportunities here going forward.
Thank you, Gerald. How is it with you, Peter, at ClearSpace?
Well, key for us is we're, to all intents and purposes, a startup. And as with all startups, there are a number of factors which are most important, not least of which is financing. That is always a struggle. So when there is an opportunity to help and aid your research project with finance that comes from either government or an intergovernment body, then it's very attractive. So your question of how do we sort of get involved with the EU defence is a good proportion of our output, which is data as a service derived from our own satellite constellation. then clearly that with the defence market as a main user, then being involved in European defence projects is the right thing to do. I have a history of European defence engagement, so it was something we wanted to do. Nevertheless, and we'll probably come into that in later questions, having now sat on both sides of the fence, i.e. working for the European Defence Agency and being involved in receiving the calls, versus being in a startup, therefore people and finance limited, and responding to those calls has been a very interesting lesson in the challenges faced by small commercial companies, the key issue being the speed of response.
Thank you very much. Maybe also to have a word from the SMT. Holger, you have had some previous experience also in the defense sector. How is this now for the SMT as a research institute?
Yeah, many thanks. Yeah, welcome everybody. Yeah, I would say it's of course from the university perspective, it's a kind of, how to say, a special sector. No, honestly, of course we are normally working, or most of the universities and also the centers now are working on more civil applications. And of course, the defense market is a quite special market, let's call it like that, and a kind of special business. No? Of course, nevertheless, and perhaps at the universities, it also mainly depends on precisely the topic where you're working on. That means, as we have heard today, one challenge is if you take part, it must be a true defense application. Yeah, and of course, very often the question is, do we have already a background or any experience with true defense applications? And therefore, often it also depends a bit on your personal background. For example, my personal background, I'm working in the drone area since more than 20 years, and I even worked in defense industry, which was really helpful. That means I know a bit the business, and but nevertheless, if you then look at overall at the SNT as an entity, as a research entity, we are already working. And if I now look at the list, which is now coming, of course, the question is always what really means true defense applications. If you now look at the list, like cyber, yeah, of course, cyber defense, this is not that much different from, let's say, cyber security if you defend an industrial plant, and even that is now included in these defense strategies. That means my feeling is that with this new fund and also with the list of the priorities, there are now quite a lot of fits, I would say, even if you're not perfectly coming with a background of true defense applications. However, what I also have to say, of course, it's if you compare it a bit with the classical European projects where universities are, of course, active, this is indeed a little bit these political aspects, as we have heard, yeah, and also the administrative, how to say, the administrative procedures, I would say, which were a bit different from what we normally know, and therefore I really appreciate the support, because that was also a key for us. That means we have already a collaboration, a long-lasting collaboration with the Luxembourg Army, and therefore we are already in constantly contact with the Defense Department. And I think it's really a key that you should have a kind of link, especially as a research institute, that you need to know your persons of contact also in the different institutions. And therefore, I also very much appreciate here the initiative that Lux Innovation is taking a bit a role in advising and perhaps matchmaking, because this was also one of the lessons learned. Of course, the key is really the consortium and the contacts and the network that you have. Yeah, and for university in the defense sector, because this, as I said, is a kind of special business. That means there are already existing networks, and there are huge companies normally working, and they have already their existing networks. And I would say, as a university, is really the key to get into these networks. People need to know you. Yeah, you only, let's say, I think for the beginning, it's very difficult to initiate a large project. It's more that you can participate. But then it's key that people know you, that they also know your expertise, and therefore for the beginning, I would say it's very essential that you also build your own network, and that you perhaps participate also in opportunities like this today, for example, that you participate in opportunities that people get aware of what you are doing.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely, I totally agree with this, with getting visibility, showing the technical capabilities. I think you mentioned also the fact that it might be difficult with no previous experience in the defense. I think here we have with Axel Gigou, a representative of a company which had no experience there. And the question here is, of course, Axel, how did you overcome these initial barriers?
Yeah. So good morning, everybody, and thank you for this invitation. So as you said, Alexander, effectively, we are a small SME, very small one, as we have the commercial subsidiary of the Research Institute VDECOM, and mainly focused on civil activities for sustainable mobility. So we were used to apply for civil program as H2020 program. And we decided to study if eventually we could find opportunities of technology transfer in between civil domain and defense domain. So for that, the first barrier is to be known and to know defense needs. So we start discussion with the DGA, and we register to the GCAT in France in order to be involved in technical groups where several topics are discussed, where technical difficulties of defense domain and defense application are really openly discussed. And then we study our asset of civil domains, and we start thinking which assets, which technological bricks could be useful for defense domain. And that was the beginning of the adventure of the IDIDP program. Thanks to one of our assets through the H2020 program, and the discussion we have with different people of defense domain, we find a technical needs with the technology bricks we have. And then but the adventure starts. So finding partners to really define a scope corresponding to a true defense application. So we were in the open call SME. And after finding the first partners, many discussion in order to properly define the project. But we were very small. And what we need is somebody who know all the different technical proposal and administrative folders to complete in order to be able to apply. And we enter in contact with Michel Garry. And as a small SME, it was really necessary to have his support and his knowledge to help us to understand everything, all the tasks we have to answer, and it's a huge work. But it was the adventure.
That's good to hear. Of course, I hear that, well, the application process itself can be quite difficult. And we saw also the slides of Mr. Komnik and Michel Garry that there are various challenges. Maybe on this side, since you went through this process, maybe also on your side, Holger, could you just describe what were the main challenges you had to compete with?
Yeah, as I already said, I fully agree. You know, so first the challenge, of course, is to get into the consortium. I would say this is for depending, of course, for us or for university partners. I would say this is, or also for SMEs, I can imagine. That means the question is how do you have the information that something is going on and how to approach a consortium. In our case, we were approached by a large company that finally then also led the consortium. That means, as I say, visibility is key, and you need to be visible also with your expertise. That means they directly came to us and said, okay, so we know that you're working in this area, and would you like to participate? That means that was already the first step to get into a consortium. And then I indeed agree with Axel. It was one part, of course, is then where we are very used to, is the technical, the description of the work packages and so on. But indeed here, especially in the EDIDP, it was quite challenging with respect also to the administrative burden. But of course, I have to say, if you look at, let's say, conventional European projects, it's also the same. That means very often my feeling was, okay, if you do it for the first time, of course, everything is new. There are many new documents and so on. If you do it then, let's say, for the second time, of course, then you have already examples and models and so on. I think my feeling was then that, of course, as in all of these research proposals, the more you do it, the more easier and faster it's also to cope with the administrative burden. That means the challenge, I would say, is the first step into it. And however, if you're then a bit more advanced, if you look at the, it was also already mentioned, if you look at the funding, let's say, rates and the amount of money that you can get, I would say it's for university and for, let's say, these conventional EU projects, they can be quite large. That means, for example, in this EDIDP, it was about more than several tens of millions of euros, and it's quite large. And but you have to be careful, of course, definitely with the funding modalities. That means in this case, but this was EDIDP. Now I think it's getting different. For the universities, the problem is always how to get the co-funding. Because we cannot say, okay, we are a company, and then if we get 50%, we just compensate the other 50% by own resources. Let's say at the university, we normally need to have somehow 100% of the funding wherever it comes from. It means now I'm really happy to see that, for example, and I think this is a really good fit for this research stream and the research call, if you are getting then 100% without, of course, the national intervention or the national co-funding, this is already, of course, very, very helpful. Because this is also for, I think the same for the SMEs. The question is, as soon as there is co-funding required, then the question is where to get it from. And of course, here it was then in the EDIDP, you had to start then also negotiating or asking your national MOD. And then, of course, it's, as Azilis was saying, then it's really key that you are doing something which is also in line with the national priorities. But nevertheless, because this was the case here, in our case, it was not directly in line with the national priorities. Nevertheless, we were encouraged to participate. And finally, at the end, because of this bonus system and each and everything, finally, of course, it's a bit a tricky thing, but we ended up to make it possible to get, for us at least, a kind of 100% funding. Then finally at the end, it takes a bit of time, but it's possible.
Okay, and I think I hear also clearly that really having the, let's say, the financial and the personal resources also to go through the application process is key. Gerald, on your side, you have also with Lufthansa, a very known company. Now I understand also, but maybe there are not always such big teams available. How did you manage to do this on this matter?
Yes, indeed. I think I really want to underline the structure the companies are having, what kind of resource profile they're having in support of these activities. It's quite an important factor next to the networking and to know the environment, to know the activities which can be proposed and so on. So that's an equally important element. But the resourcing is key. Then now I think compared to our understanding, well, there are two major directions. Either there's basically in consortia prime, which will be taking the bigger burden of the workload to produce the submission, which is then typically also quite often in a bigger company, which having by nature separate project organizations and also experiences from the past, from Horizon 2020 project, from FP7, from EU, other EU, EDA, ESA projects, and all these elements. Because if there's already a certain pool of documentation, templates, and experiences all in all available, then the process is smoother and it's more oiled compared from a greenfield approach. And that's a very important element. And for us, then we are as well quite small in comparison. So we certainly we did not have any means to prime an activity. So we basically we joined other companies in our ED-IDP project in supporting based on our core expertise and our core assets from the company perspective. What can we bring to the table? And had been providing this during the ramp-up discussions in advance of the submission. And based on these, basically, we had for us kind of a streamlined proposal where we can really see these are our resource estimations we had been relying on in doing the discussions, and then based on these, actually we are executing upon since we have the grant. So, and for us, I have to say, it's all in all, it's a quite a good experience, the ED-IDP program. So it is a good exercise, I think, in total to have these developments going forward with a wide range of companies. It's a very well starting block as well for future activities because, well, I think we are 10 nations, 10, 12 companies as part of the group. So it's an embarrassing exercise also for Europe and for all of us in total and going forward, also for next endeavors potentially.
Okay, I thank you very much already for this. I come back maybe to one of the questions that were raised also previously. So getting the support of the Ministry of Defense, or of at least two countries when it comes to development activities is essential. So Peter, if I may address this question to you, how as clear as this address, because you have successfully developed already defense applications, what is the best way to approach MOD and what needs to be taken particularly into attention?
Let me address that slightly abstractly. But I think first of all is to take from the previous speaker the benefits of doing this sort of thing, which in our case, we have a pretty unique product. So in the sense of having to find, and Holger made the point of finding how to get involved in projects and what projects are out there, we're quite lucky in that there is a tendency for people to come looking for us because we've got something other people haven't got. But there is an issue of resource to do it, and the probability of success versus the amount of resource you have to put in to do it is an issue. Although if you do it more than once, clearly you learn from previous experiences and in theory it gets easier. Nevertheless, it is quite a big decision to make. In terms of addressing the, so in that sense, sorry to go back, finding consortia and others who are engaged in what we're doing and see us as an addition to the project is relatively easy. But approaching MOD is hard. Azali's touched on the fact that MOD is, the direction is relatively small, and the manning, the personnel situation there is tight, so it is hard work. And then in any nation, this is not an issue necessarily focused at Luxembourg, there's this balance between and we heard about it, the EU requirement and the national requirement. Now, if you're operating in a large country, then with a big defence spend and a large 3, 4, or 5 domain, if you include space, etc., armed forces, then the chances of being able to slip into a national priority is quite high. If you're in a smaller, approaching a smaller defence department that has very limited resource and limited priorities, you have to be more innovative and cleverer in how you make what you're doing fit into the priorities of defence. But I think then there's a turn of a responsibility on the Defence Department to also be flexible in what it supports, because both in bidding for European funding, and actually for the credibility of any defence company, the support of the country in which it resides, and the defence and military, and if those two are slightly different, of the country in which it resides, is really important to give credibility and backing to what they do. So a very slightly abstract answer to your question, but I think it makes the point that you have to be flexible.
Okay, thank you very much. I would then like to go maybe to another point, which is crucial for the defense program. So dual use, the bridge between civil, defense and space industry. The European Commission has been setting up an action plan to create more synergies between these areas. So Excel maybe for Vidicom Tech, which is an actor which has managed to do this tech transfer from civil to defense. How did you address this in your EDIDP project?
Okay, so we are typically in this transfer of technology in our case. So as I explained at the beginning, we use some assets we have through the H2020 program. So to give you the example, it's we have to set up a vehicle convoy, what is called platooning, for civil applications. So you have a vehicle leader and some vehicle followers without drivers. And to address defense domain, we do not address it through a technology, but through a use case. What are the defense needs, and how our asset could be interesting for defense domain. But the base, it's a use case. And after we see how technology can be adapted and which technology bricks still not exist. And for the EDIDP program, there is a link in between our application for civil domain, the convoy, and we see which technology respecting defense constraints, because these are not the same in between the two domains, in order to develop technology adapted to defense domain. And now we thanks to other applications, so we have now new ideas. But the origin, it's this example.
Okay, I think this is also something which applies probably well to the SNT. So Holger, if you have both these applications, civil and defense, how do you manage, how do you discover the advantages of making this bridge between civil and defense?
Yeah, I would say, so first of all, it really depends on, depends on the maturity of the application that the consortium has in mind. That means very often the universities have then a role. Of course, we are coming from research, maximum development or applied research. And very often these parts are then not, if you talk about, the question is then on the research level, what is a true defense application? Let's say overall, it must be a true defense application. But what is a true defense related research? That means in our case, like cybersecurity, of course, you can apply perhaps the same algorithm in a civil application, or you can also apply it in a military application. That means for us as a research center, as long as our task is a bit on the research level, then it's not so, I would say it's not so difficult. There are always ways to, let's say, to be included and to treat, I would say, a bit the special research questions which are still there, or to provide applied research. And for dual use, what I have seen is, of course, very often, for example, military applications are very challenging. That means there's very often you have to be prepared for very, very challenging environmental conditions. For example, if you talk about vehicles and things like that, which of course then allows you to think about making your contributions more robust. For example, against really, let's say, I would say unconventional conditions, which can then of course also help. yeah, in a civil application, because you somehow make a big step forward. Yeah? Or for example, another example is in the drone domain. In the drone domain, of course, if you talk about civil applications, very often they are still under remote control, while in military applications, there's much higher degree of autonomy needed. And if you talk about this digital transformation, very often this is much more needed in military applications, perhaps, than in civil applications. That means this was also something interesting to see. If you think about these aspects that are coming, I would say, from the requirements of a military application, can of course also help you to develop new aspects for future more advanced commercial applications. So I see it a bit like that.
Okay, thank you very much, Holger. I think we still have some minutes left, let's say like this. So I would just like to address maybe the last question to those who have also been able to already create an impact, economic impact, which, as said, ensuring that the developments enable the strengthening of the EU defense capabilities is key, but helping also the EU defense technology and the industry base to be more innovative and to grow is also a key. And therefore, the question here is, how does the European defense programs help you to address new markets, new customers, and eventually, what do you expect in terms of return on invest? Peter, if you could possibly provide an answer on this, and then also Gerald on your side. Thank you.
I think there are two sides to it. The first is, and I'll be brief because I know time is short. I think the first is, I think the process of applying and getting the funding is a very good way of brigading your thoughts, of ensuring that the structure of ownership, etc., is correct and that you're supporting the right people. And then having that funding allows progression in the project in a way that just might not be possible without that type of intervention. But the second point is really important, is if you get that type of support, in other words, you get a European endorsement of what you're trying to do, then that gives you a credibility in the marketplace. This was funded by Europe. This is available to all the EU military, in the case we're talking about now, defense users, and they want it because they've said they'll put some money into it. And that is so important as you try and address other markets, thereby creating that stone rolling down the hill, or snowball rolling down the hill and gaining speed and momentum, and thereby bringing more economic benefit into Europe for the product that you have. So I think it's the beginning to get you going, and afterwards to show credibility to what you've done.
Maybe Gerald, from your side, just in a minute, your opinion to that.
Okay. Yeah, I think mainly as well 2 points similar to Peter. Basically, it's the project where we are basically in the EDIDP participating is a clear capability which EU is addressing. So it is over time there will be a new capability being required to be implemented. As so far we are only talking about development, but during the implementation, then of course it will be an element where contributions from all the project partners will be somewhat basically also foreseen for the future during the implementation phase, and of course then subsequent operation. So there's an experience level then already available from all the project partners in order to get a good position then going forward when the tender for the capability implementation at one point in time will be released. So there's an experience set which is quite valuable going forward over time. The other point, the other element dimension is essentially the networking side. So the more we are known as well, we are still as well a quite a small company in this very specific market niche, but still the more we are known inside other partners and other niches might open up over time, and that's a very important element for us as well.
Thank you very much for your contribution. I think now this panel discussion made it very clear. So there's a lot of opportunities in the EDF, and there's of course also challenges. And I think here we have very, very good testimonials which can highlight how you can really make it through this process. So I would like to thank very much all the panelists for having been with us. And I would like to get very quickly to our last agenda point, which will be the wrap-up. So we have seen the European Commission, Michel Garry, to give us an introduction on the EDF principle, the eligible actions, and the funding rates and award criteria. We have seen Azilis Guerard from the Luxembourgish MOD provided an overview of the defense priorities in terms of R&D and how the defense department can support you in your participation to the EDF. Michel Garry has provided us some deeper explanations on the key challenges to be addressed when preparing an application for the European Defence Fund. And we have received very interesting insights from our 4 panelists in order to become more familiar with the challenges and opportunities of the upcoming EDF call for proposals. Now, for an outlook and also to close this info day, I would like to inform you that Lux Innovation organizes a virtual B2B matchmaking event together with the French Defense and Security Association GCAT. It will take place on the 1st of July 2021, and it certainly represents a great opportunity for Luxembourgish companies and research institutes to demonstrate their technological capabilities, to create links with the members of the GCAT, and to contribute as such to the creation of consortia between French and Luxembourgish actors with regards to the call for proposals of the European Defence Fund. The registration on the B2B platform will be launched on the 14th of June, with the possibility then to book B2B meetings starting on the 22nd of June. More information will, of course, be published on the website of Lux Innovation within the next days. With this, I would like to thank again all the speakers and the participants for having been with us today. In case you want to get more information on the R&D defense funding opportunities at national and European level, you're of course very welcome to contact me at Lux Innovation. So thank you very much and enjoy your lunch.